like to humbly and respectfully address you as a voice from amongst those 80 small nation states. And so I'm saying this platform that we have must take us into dialogue with respect to matters, as I said before, of international financial institutions, informal groupings such as the G20, and the wider international community as we continue to search for a way forward and a way out of the financial crisis. Notwithstanding the important role of these processes, I believe that the General Assembly must play a major role in global economic governance. So, Mr. President, I congratulate you for convening this very important debate. Whilst my own country, Trinidad and Tobago, because of our energy-driven economy, international reserves and lower public debt level, may have escaped the worst shocks of the global financial crisis in the first round, many of our CARICOM neighbors, as well as other small states, have not been so fortunate. At this juncture, the global economy remains in a precarious state. Developed economies continue to face multiple challenges, while partly due to the contagion effects of the euro area crisis, growth in some major emerging market economies has slowed in recent months. Whilst the resolution of the crisis has been long in coming, it is clear that the full extent of the problem is not yet evident. The initial concerns were about Italy, Spain and Greece. Now the most recent focus has been on Cyprus, and indeed questions continue to be asked which country shall be next. Thus it is easy to understand why we in our region look on with grave anxiety at the uncertainty that the global economy faces. Europe is experiencing difficulties generated by the debt crisis. Amongst the advanced economies, the US economy is recovering, but at a slow pace from the deep recession of prior years. The economic and, by extension, social prognosis for small states is therefore even more difficult. In my region, the CARICOM region, we remain highly susceptible to external shocks. Our economies are dependent on the US and European markets for trade, foreign direct investment, tourism and remittances. As many would be aware, the global financial and economic crisis has and continues to reduce foreign exchange inflows from these sources, which in turn has affected macroeconomic performance, reduced growth, employment, reduced income levels, and indeed worsened poverty levels. High food and fuel prices are heightening concerns about food and energy security. In addition, sovereign debt problems in some countries have led them to the doors of the IMF and the World Bank. Mr. President, access to global markets is important for small states. External private markets tend to see small states as significantly more risky than larger states, hence making market access more difficult. In particular, access to concessional financing is critical for CARICOM countries, especially for those with very high debt burdens. We therefore welcome, Mr. President, the improvements made to the lending facilities of the IMF in recent years, with the introduction of the following: a flexible credit line, the precautionary credit line, the post-catastrophic debt relief trust, the reform of the concessional lending facilities to low-income countries, and more recently, the introduction of the rapid financial instruments. However, I say respectfully, a gap persists, as concessional financing for small states remains very inadequate. A facility for the highly indebted, disaster-prone middle-income countries is missing. With dwindling donor support and with the erosion of trade preferences for agriculture, we in CARICOM need to simultaneously engage several strategies to ensure survival. And so we must lower debt to create fiscal space, diversify and narrow productive bases, reduce dependence on US and European markets, create new ties with emerging market economies, and indeed improve our own competitiveness. You would appreciate that such strategies require time, finances, and support from the international community. We need to employ new strategies in order to address this critical question. As such, CARICOM and other small states need to focus on the following: and I respectfully make these suggestions. 1. Concessional financing for infrastructural development. 2. Access to markets for our products, including tourism. 3. Debt relief for highly indebted countries. And 4. Technology transfer. Additionally, 5, I would say, more important for our region, we embrace external buffers put in place by institutions such as the IMF, which provide lines of credit economies facing external shocks. Trinidad and Tobago submits, respectfully, that safeguards are inadequate to resolve the problems in the region and alongside with other small economies. The old approach to doing things is not working. And I repeat, the old approach to doing things is just not working. It is for this reason that Trinidad and Tobago has taken the initiative to start a conversation within the governance of the IMF to ensure that small economies are given a political presence in the deliberations of such bodies. Trinidad and Tobago is using this position as the only CARICOM member of the G24 to advocate for greater dialogue with the G20 and the multilateral lending organizations to give greater attention to issues facing small and vulnerable states. The General Assembly, as the voice of 193 member states with equal status under the UN Charter, in my respectful view, must not be silent on this matter, because the international financial and economic crisis dictate the need for a global governance structure which takes into consideration the unique circumstances of every state and of small states. This new architecture should adequately address the concerns of all states. But today, such a governance structure is only a dream. The General Assembly, in my respectful view, should develop mechanisms to make that dream into a reality. Mr. President, some of the decisions adopted by organizations like the OECD have very far-reaching consequences on the economic and social welfare of developing countries. For instance, the OECD's initiative to put countries on grey lists and blacklists have a very severe implications for some of our Caribbean countries and indeed for small states. This was a prime example of a long-existing disconnect whereby large countries impose their policies on small states and low-income countries without adequate consultation, consideration, and engagement. There is urgent need for a platform where the dialogue on issues concerning small states and low-income countries could be incorporated at a global level, and in those fora where major and far-reaching economic decisions are taken. Respectfully, I say this should apply in organizations like the G20, but also the IMF, the World Bank, and international agencies and bodies. And so, the voice of the developing and least developed countries must also be taken into consideration in discussions on improving global economic governance. Some bodies for achieving this already exist, such as the G24. However, in my respectful view, there is need for a more inclusive and consultative mechanism whereby issues pertinent to small states can be addressed within the G20 agenda. Mr. President, as I close, I say that global economic governance also requires a need, for example, a realignment of the chairs of the IMF Executive Board to give more voice to the emerging market and developing countries. To conclude, Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago submits the following as imperatives for an improvement in global economic governance. Changes to the international architecture in which the IMF and the G20 sit lend themselves to a potential contravention of natural justice, where clubs of large countries sit and develop rules for smaller states to follow without, in my respectful view, adequate consultation, considerations, and engagement with those small states. The development of international financial regulation, supervision, risk management, and assessment of financial sectors do not support a level playing field between large and small states. The preferential treatment given to areas important in some large states, from mortgages and regional bans to hybrid capital treatment, that proved so dangerous in the financial crisis, also penalizes institutions in small states beyond, again with due respect, economic justification. The criteria of lending used by the multinational institutions is better suited to larger states with capital markets, credit ratings, and diversified private sector players. The criteria used for long-term and short-term support pays too much attention to the level of GDP per capita and not sufficiently enough to the much higher levels of fragility and vulnerability to natural and economic shocks. I therefore use this debate forum to once again call on the Managing Director of the IMF and the President of the World Bank to intensify attention on the issues of small and vulnerable economies. Ultimately, global economic governance and reform, as articulated by the G24 central bank officials and finance ministers last year at the IMF World Bank annual general meetings, must reflect the growing role of emerging market developing countries as a whole in the global economy, while enhancing the voice and representation of poor, small, low and middle income countries. Mr. President, Excellencies, all, I thank you very much.
I thank Her Excellency.